we were told yesterday, one thing that I realized, that we're going to have we need 14,000 new graduates a year starting in 2 years. 14,000, that's 35% more graduates than we have right now. We also yesterday looked at the student-teacher ratios at all of our STEM curriculums, especially engineering. And what we found was the vast majority of them are all full. They're 40, 50, 60, and in case of LSU's petroleum engineering, 80-to-1 student-teacher ratio. I'd call that fairly efficient. Maybe not sustainable, but very efficient. In order to get 14,000 new graduates through these programs, we're going to have more instructors. We're going to have more professors. There's no other way around it. I can't make 800 million square feet of OSB without 1.2 million tons of logs. If I only have 500,000 tons, I'm not going to make it. So if we are going to have this chance in this state to fill 14,000 new graduate jobs in this state with Louisiana graduates, we've got to act now, and that's going to cost money. There's no other way around it. That 14,000, if you take our past history, cost about $45,000 per graduate, which is not a bad cost nationwide. But that's $636 million. That is what we're going to have in order to achieve the goal. There's no other way around it. And I hope that there are some elected officials listening to this right now and have that type of attitude next year to prioritize our $25 billion state budget in order for higher education to have the instructors and the professors that we need. We have the facilities. We have the facilities. We have to have the instructors. Our student-teacher ratios are such we can't. There are some exceptions to that, of course. There are some programs that can take a few more students, but that's a very small piece of the pie compared to the overall deal. Tuition increases alone are not going to get us there. Our flagship, maybe, we may have a little tuition area, but our regional institutions and LCTCS, they can't raise tuition anymore. We're seeing a decrease in students at some institutions, primarily because of the tuition. We've got to make it affordable, and the state, if they want the jobs filled with Louisiana graduates, are going to have to give us more resources to hire the people that we need. And with that diatribe, Regent Ed, Markle, would you call your committee to order?
I shall. Thank you, Regent Burton. I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Ms. Goodson, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Chairman Markle.
Here.
Regent Brandt. Regent Chabert. I know he's here somewhere.
He was here.
Regent Dupuy.
Here.
Regent Farr.
Here.
Regent Harrington.
Here.
Regent Levy.
Here.
Regent Stream.
Here.
Regent Temple.
Here.
Supervisor Steve Smith.
Here.
Supervisor Ann Smith.
Present.
Supervisor Yarborough. Supervisor Seville.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Barbara. Let's begin the agenda with item number 3, the approval of the preliminary formula funding and budget request for fiscal year 2016-2017.
Yes, sir. Before we start going through the presentation, I'd like to make a statement, follow up on what the chairman said. We started right after the session in July with weekly meetings with representatives from the staffs from all of the systems, including the finance staffs for the institutions and also from what we're calling the specialized units from the health science centers, ag centers, and Pennington. So I want you to know that this was a very deliberate and thoughtful process. We met at least once a week for several hours each week, started developing different formulas. One, we updated the cost formula that has been in place for about 8 or 9 years and started looking at what we could do to improve it. We also kept in mind that we had legislation out there by Senator Appel that was passed 2 years ago in order for us to move to an outcomes-based funding formula. So we had several dual tracks going all at one time. As the chairman indicated, we had a meeting yesterday. We wanted to make sure that we understood exactly some of the concerns and some of the needs that the four systems had indicated during this process. We want to make sure the presidents were there and with the commissioner to agree on a plan of action for today's meeting. Today's meeting is to make a budget request for 16-17 for the operating budget. And so in order to do that, we ran all these different models, and the number that you will see before you in a few minutes will be representative of several different things. It will represent changes in costs that we have updated because there were several different factors that had never been included or should have been inflated, updated due to inflationary costs. It also represents performance metrics that we have worked on in order to prioritize completers, progression, Pell students, and our workforce needs. And we did a lot of work with economic development and the workforce department in order to better prepare for the 4- and 5-star jobs that were more pertinent to the Louisiana economy. And I want to point that out again. What we tried to do is focus on what employers have told our state officials of what they're looking for. So we did a tiered approach, not just 4- and 5-star jobs, but we also tried to prioritize the jobs that are most needed in our economy and build it into this model. So just to point out a few of the changes that we did, in the current budget process, we have one model that was 2- and 4-year combined, and then basically the specialized units was just looking at the budget they had the previous year. So the process envisioned breaking out a pool of money for the 2-year institutions and a pool for the 4-year institutions, primarily to recognize the different role, scope, and mission of these institutions and the population that they are designed to serve. We also wanted to look at the specialized units to have a formula to, again, recognize their role, scope, and mission. The Ag Center's role, scope, and mission is very different from a 2- and 4-year. And so we also wanted to recognize the value of research, the research that these institutions bring to our state. In the 2- and 4-year cost calculation, some of the other adjustments that we did is we looked at the facility costs, keeping in mind what Regent Lipsey has indicated. We have a lot of maintenance issues out there. The square footage facility cost that was built in the formula we have used previously was at $6.75 a square foot. And that was an old number. It had not been updated since at least '08. So what we did is we did a inflationary factor, just using a CPI to come up with a new square footage cost to recognize changes that the institutions have to pay for to keep up with some of their facilities. We also broke out a separate calculation, which had never been done before, to recognize the difference in cost for research institutions and the actual research space that they utilize, because when they go to apply for research grants, they have to indicate a cost, an overhead cost for some of those research facilities, and it is very different from a classroom cost. You have different equipment, different needs, different usage. So for the first time, we have separated out the facility space from classroom to research. What had never been included before in any of the cost models was healthcare. Healthcare costs that the institutions have to pay, and this is the employer cost. And so what we did is we surveyed all the institutions and came up with what we thought was a range of what it costs the institutions to provide health care to their employees. And so in addition to the retirement costs that the institutions have to pay, we've added in the health care cost too. That brings the fringe benefit cost up to around 40%. And actually, if you look at the budgets and most of the agency budgets, the fringe benefit cost is probably a little bit more than that, but we felt that we could fully justify a fringe benefit of 40% per employee. And this is only actually applied to the faculty costs. So the other difference we made, and we had this argument for the last 2 or 3 years, an argument, but a difference of opinion about withdrawals. We had in previous years withdrawn the cost of programs where a student dropped the classes. And as the institutions explained to us repeatedly, they have the cost even if the student decided to drop it. And so what we did is we took that impetus and moved it away from the cost side, which means we did not subtract for the students that withdrew, and we're going to handle it on the performance side to try to encourage the institutions to get the students through the course. And so we made a strategic decision to change that from a cost to a performance metric. We also had, in the last several years, we've had what we call strategic initiatives built into the cost side of the formula, and that was for workforce research and handling Pell students, the disadvantaged students, from a cost perspective. We removed all of that on the cost side and pushed all of those metrics onto the performance side in order to, again, recognize role, scope, and mission for these institutions and to try to encourage them on the performance side, because we will be looking at it as we evaluate on the performance on who has met some of these targets. So these were very strategic decisions to change it from a cost to a performance metric. One of the other items that we have pushed for since July during this process was to embed in the formula, in the outcomes-based formula process, the GRAD Act metrics that we consider to be the most valuable throughout this process, in the hope of meshing the two ideas together to where we would no longer actually need separate reporting requirements for GRAD Act, but we would incorporate the best ideas through the funding formula in order to recognize the performance of the institutions. So, using all of these different methods, and we have lots of different calculations to come up with how these numbers were generated, you'll see that our existing operating budget for without TOPS is the $769 million. That is without LOSFA. What we have generated on the outcomes funding includes the changes in the cost, rewarding performance, and trying to produce additional graduates in either for the workforce need. So it is a combination of the three different goals to try to help Louisiana better prepare for the workforce that we need. So the request would be $1.4 billion for the operating budget, plus LOSFA, which includes TOPS, which is $300 million. That has an increase projected for 16-17. So the total higher ed budget request for the operating budgets for all agencies would be $1.7 billion. It is staff's recommendation that the Finance Committee and the Board approve this request.
Thank you, Barbara. Members, you've heard the recommendations and the comments of Ms. Goodson. Are there any questions or comments? On a motion to approve, do I hear a second?
I have a question before you move the motion. I'm fine with the motion in a second. I just have a question before you move on it, Mr. Chairman. Okay. First off, that's a pretty darn big request considering where we are today, right?
Yes, sir, it is.
That's a pretty significant increase, but I guess it's a request, right? It's not
It is a request.
So why not shoot for the moon and tell them what you need and then see what you get, right? There's no reason not to.
We have been here before. This is where we were in 2008.
Right.
And we did not have as many jobs.
Right.
It's a big request, but we have a large number of jobs to fill.
Yeah, and your discussion, what you call the diatribe a little while ago, I think you're right on point. I mean, didn't hear anything there I disagreed with. So you got to make the request, and then you got to see if you can get it funded. But the thing that, and I know we're not talking about distributing any of this today, you did get into a good bit of detail about how you would distribute if you, and how you calculated it, right, which would lead obviously to the distribution. The only thing that still is in, at least our line with the LCTCS, is stop loss and its effect on our operations as we move forward. I would hope that remains.